Okay, so it's my great pleasure to welcome back to Happy Valley Professor Dan Hansong from Nanjing University. He's the colleague there that I've worked the most with, who's been the most helpful for me, both here and there in Nanjing. He is Associate Professor of English in the School of Foreign Studies at that university. Nanjing, by the way, has a formal affiliation with Penn State, and particularly with comparative literature and with Asian studies. And that was built out especially by Eric Hayot and then Shuang Shen. So his research interests include modern contemporary American novels, 9/11 literature, post-humanism, and digital humanities. And he has authored numerous articles in nationally renowned journals such as Foreign Literature Review. His articles in English can be found in volumes published by Northwestern University Press and by the Royal Swedish Academy of Letters, History, and Antiquities. His book, To Realize the Universal Allegorical Narrative in Thornton Wilder's Plays and Novels, was published by Peter Lang in 2012. And he is also a translator, having translated works by Thomas Pynchon, Julian Barnes, and Thornton Wilder. He is also the co-editor of a forthcoming special issue of Comparative Literature Studies, co-editing with Maria Wojno of the University of Warsaw, on global crises and 21st century world literature. Professor Dan will talk to us today. He will do a comparison of the Chinese novel Wolf Totem with Coetzé's novel Disgrace. So please join me in welcoming Dan Hansong.
It's a great honor and a burden for me to give a talk here, and it's a pleasure to be back to this beautiful campus. First of all, I want to thank you, Penn State, for hosting my visit and the excellent accommodation I can have, so I can stay away from my school job and have my first sabbatical weeks. So it's a great pleasure. And I was great, I had a lot of burden because I was not trained as a comparatist, I have to confess. I was trained as a American literature scholar. And so I was invited by Penn State Comparative Literature Department. I have to say something about comparison. So that's a topic I came up with. And When Species Meet is obviously a title I steal from Donna Haraway's book. And John Rung's Wolf Totem and Coetzé's Disgrace are two novels that are concerned with the human and non-human, always say subhuman encounters somewhere in the world. And just in case you must be quite familiar with Coetzé's Disgrace, I will more focus on John Rung's text. John Rung's Wolf Totem came out in 2004, and its gigantic commercial success was phenomenal. It might be an understatement to merely say that this work of fiction was a bestseller. In fact, Wolf Totem has sold more than 5 million copies in China, along with 4 times that number of pirated copies. It is reported to be the most best-selling book ever in China, second only to China Mouth's Little Red Book. The English translation was masterfully done by Howard Goldblatt, the translator of Mo Yan, the Nobel laureate. And won the first Man-Asian Literary Prize in 2007. The 2015 film adaptation by the French director Jean-Jacques animal was the latest reminder of the publishing sensation created by this book. The review in the New York Times, however, is less enthusiastic. This chunky book is described as an awkwardly paced narrative full of set-piece didacticism, and the main character, Chen Zhen, according to the reviewer, never assumes much complexity and density as a character. Wolfgang Kuben, a German sinologist, is even harsher. He condemned this book as fascist and said it causes China to lose face. The film, for all its riveting and magnificent natural vista and pulse-pounding action, was conceived as a mild turn-off by some Western film critics, because the story boils down to a familiar environmental allegory that doesn't move or provoke too deeply. I think a few paragraphs from Totem will give us a sense of this book. Out here, the grass and the grassland are the light, the big light. All else is a little light that depends on the big light for survival. Even wolves and humans are little light. Creatures that eat grass are worse than creatures that eat meat. Grass is a big light, yet it is the most fragile, the most miserable light. Its roots are shallow, the soil is thin, and though it lives on the ground, it cannot run away. Anyone can step on it, eat it, chew it, crush it. For us Mongols, there's nothing more deserving of pity than the grass. Here's another paragraph. You are going to need more courage than that. Bilgi, that's a herdsman. He is teaching some lesson to the character from Beijing. He said softly, you are like a sheep. A fear of wolves is in your bones. That's the only explanation for why you people, the Han Chinese, never won a fight out here in Inner Mongolia. The third, the way I, the protagonist, Chen Zhen, see it, the most advanced people today are descendants of nomadic races. They drink milk, eat cheese and steak, weave clothing from wool, lay salt, raise dogs, fight bulls, raise horses, and compete in athletics. They cherish freedom and popular elections, and they have respect for their women. All traditions and habits passed down by their nomadic ancestors. Not only did they inherit the courage, the militancy, and the tenacity, and they need to forge ahead from their nomadic forebears, but they continue to improve on those characteristics. Learning Westerners' progressive skills isn't hard. China launched its own satellite, didn't it? What's hard to learn are the militancy and aggressiveness, the courage and willingness to take risks that flow in nomadic veins. So is Totem really didactic? Yes. It is about intellectual education on the grasslands of Inner Mongolia. The irony is Chen Zhen, a well-educated student from Beijing, was supposed to teach the generally less civilized nomadic shepherds, only to be educated by an elderly herdsman and the wolves on the grassland. His education is both historical and cosmological. On the one hand, Chen Zhen, a Han Chinese from the nation's political center, came to realize that the national character is deeply flawed because China is modeled on agrarian civilization, and its people are simply too sheepish. Why did China suffer so many humiliating defeats in the modern period? Chen Zhen's conclusion is very simple and sweeping. We lack the Wu spirit that used to make the 13th century Mongol cavalry led by Genghis Khan so powerful. To revitalize modern China would necessitate the Han Chinese learning from the Wus and returning to the ancient Mongols' value system. On the other hand, Chen Zhen learned the cosmic philosophy embodied in the faith of Tengri. That's a Mongolian word, means blue sky. For the local nomads, the grassland is a big life, which is thinner than people's eyelids. If it dies, so will the cows and sheep and horses, as well as the wolves and the people, all the little lives. Then not even the Great Wall, not even Beijing will be protected. So this is why the nomads love and hate the grassland wolves. The wolves endanger their livestock, but are worshipped as wolf totem. The holistic idea goes, these formidably smart and cruel predators are sacred guardians of the big life. Their fangs are essential to the delicate checks and balances of the ecosystem in Inner Mongolia. Another question, is wolf totem a fascist text? Kubin's indictment is shaky. If we take a look at the author's life, as we now know, Zhang Rong is a pseudonym of Lü Jiaming, a fact few people know about when the book went viral in China. It was not until he won the Man Asian Literary Prize that we saw for the first time his photo. So there are some very good reasons for the secrecy surrounding his identity. He was denounced as counter-revolution at the age of 18 for writing an essay. And he was and volunteered to go as sent down youth to Inner Mongolia in 1967, 1 year before Chairman Mao coerced 17 million youth to leave home and serve the rural people. He stayed in Inner Mongolia, a place far away from the chaos of political chaos of the Cultural Revolution, and lived as a nomad there for 11 years. In the 1980s, he became an outspoken dissident and joined the democratic movement in Beijing, only narrowly escaping death penalty. So when writing Wolf Totem, he was a retired professor at a prestigious university in Beijing, but the name of this university was never revealed. I guess it's probably Beijing University. And he was denied a passport by the government. His wife, Zhang Kangkang, herself a leading writer, said he, quote, locked himself in his office every day and refused to tell me what he was doing, end quote. So could such a liberal intellectual, or as Zhang Rong himself put it, a critical left-wing thinker, be motivated to write a fascist fiction? I highly doubt it. But I understand Kubin's concern. As Haiyan Li, a fabulous Stanford professor, notes in her book, the width of racism in this book is unmistakable. For Zhang Rong, the right path of acquiring wolf spirit for Han Chinese like Chen Zhen is a racial conversion, which means they must become wolves themselves. One paragraph from Wolf Totem states as follows. That's a little bit fascist. In the course of human history, the forerunners have always been those armed with a wolf spirit. On the world stages of ruthless competition, the sheep want to rest, but the wolves will not. Even strong wolves will be eaten by still stronger wolves, not to mention weak and sickly lambs. If the Chinese Huaxia Minzu wish to stand tall among the world's wolves, they must thoroughly eradicate the sheep nature from the agrarian national character and turn themselves into mighty wolves. So obviously, what Zhang Rong endorses here is a vulgar version of social Darwinism that stipulates the survival of the fittest, idea never congruent with Charles Darwin's theory on natural selection. The author even goes so far as to let Chen Zhen, his fictional alter ego, speak highly of the heroic side of samurai fascism. That's one sentence from the book. Learning the wrong lesson that leads to samurai fascism But anyone who lacks the death before surrender spirit will always be subjugated by samurai fascists. Haiyan Li poignantly paraphrases this sentence and concludes that for Zhang Rong, becoming fascists, the wrong kind of wolves, is still preferable to being the victim of fascism. Although I don't think Zhang Rong is agitating for neo-fascism in China, it is quite obvious that his abhorrence of weakling nations exceeds his dislike of fascism. So far, I have delineated some key aspects of Wolf Totem: the story, the character, the author, and some controversies this book inevitably gives rise to. Zhang's wolf versus man fiction, like many other canine tales, such as Jack London's The Call of the Wild, can be read as a double text. On the surface, it is about the collision between two ideologies: a Mongolian minority culture and the majority Han Chinese socio-economic practices. Put in a simple way, it is a text beating for conservationism, which probably explains why this political dissident's book escaped censorship, even after his identity was exposed. Here's a quote from Clifford Coonan in his review for The Independent. He writes, "It is a real surprise. The book did not fall foul of the Communist Party's beady-eyed censors, as it can be read as a call for greater personal freedom and individual responsibility. It is also critical of the philosophy of Confucianism. The Communist Party has promoted a return to traditional Confucian values in recent years to fill a spiritual void left by breakneck economic growth." Even Zhang Rong himself said he was half surprised and half not surprised that this book was not banned. He told a journalist that, quote, "I was surprised that the government discovered my real identity only very late. If they had known I wrote the book, then I would have been banned. Then this book would have been banned. Now I do not hide my identity to foreign media. And in China, on the internet, my identity is an open secret." In fact, there's another reason. I think there's another reason why Wolf Totem was tolerated by the party. 1 year before the publication of this book, the former leader Hu Jintao made scientific outlook on development, that in Chinese means 科学发展观, the guiding social-economic principle. The vision is to create a harmonious society, which entails environmental harmony, or a better relationship between man and nature. Similarly, for President Xi Jinping, the cornerstone of China's new blueprint is an ecological civilization, 生态文明. He demands that local officials stop ignoring the environment in favor of the economy. So when Zhang Rong wrote about the life and the death of a pack of wolves on the grassland in Inner Mongolia and painstakingly veiled his real intention in allegorization, he probably had no idea how politically correct his canine tales would become, especially after sandstorms from Inner Mongolia as a result of environmental degradation. More and more frequently inflicted Beijing in the recent years. But Wolf Totem as a double text has another side. In my opinion, it can be read as a historical critique of Chineseness. As we know, Zhang Rong's story is loosely based on his own experience, but it might be unwise to press for historical authenticity in imaginative literature. Some detractors of this book argue that the wolf was not the totem of the Mongolian people in ancient times, and that Zhang Rong over-romanticized the grassland wolves. Other critics cast doubt on the narrator's generalization of Chinese history, saying it might be reductive to contribute Genghis Khan's military triumph over the Han people merely to the Wu spirit. Yet, Zhang probably never meant to be mimetic, which explains why the protagonist remains flat and lacks psychological depth throughout the fiction. So, I just partially agree with Haiyan Li's observation. She says, Zhang novel is ultimately not about the Mongols and the animals and the totems. Instead, it is a profoundly Han-centric and anthropocentric text that harkens back to the century-old racial nationalist question: how can China attain wealth and power and avert the fate of extinction in the Darwinian jungle? What I concur with is that wolf totem is no doubt, it's not about using Deleuze's term becoming animal, nor is it a historical inquiry about the Mongols. Zhang takes his literary wolves as carrier animals for extended polemic about ethnicity, progress, identity, and ethics. In this sense, Zhang's agenda is definitely anthropocentric. What I can't agree with, however, is the indictment of profoundly Han-centric tendency in this book. The author, given his setbacks in a series of democratic movements in China, may feel a little bit disillusioned with the people who failed to show solidarity and resolution in their resistance against authority. It's not so much the Han people as a grassroots class in this country he most hopes to take side with. And his bitter disappointment is not only the people's cowardice in front of the state power, but also the people's submission to the prodigious consumerism that defines our age and results in some major economic catastrophes today. So now, I want to reframe my discussion here. Why don't we stop asking what Wolf Totem is about? And why don't we ask what Zhang Rong's literary text does? By reading the text as a world literature, I'm drawing on Penn-shaped redefinition of this term as world-making activity. Traditionally, world literature is conceptualized as Western, non-Western literary works circulating as a cultural commodities in the world market, or as Frank Moretti says, in a world system. Rather than imagining world literature in a spatial world, Che views a given work of world literature as a locus where different processes of worlding here are played out in a historically specific field of forces. Here, the term worlding is infused with an odd mixture of Heideggerian origin and Spivak's post-colonial usage. For Heidegger, it refers to how a world is held together and a given unity by the force of time. For Spivak, it describes imperialist discursive cartography. So hence, world literature is an endless process of temporalization, implicates a performative power or efficacy to change the world according to a normative ethical-political horizon. And the result is not to mimic a world in the throes of crisis or to create a possible world on the page, but to provide leverage to redress the crisis and make desired changes happen. Idealistically speaking, world literature, according to Che again, can remake the world as a place that is open to the emergence of peoples that globalization deprives of world. Deprives of world. Wolf Totem, therefore, is best conceived as an event of world literature, which contains normative forces to change the way the Chinese, his target readers, view the status in and relationship with the world, and to bring different modes of temporality, such as modernity embraced by the Han Chinese, the Mongols' holistic and ahistorical Tangurism, and the world according to the grassland wolves, to bring all these temporalities into complex interaction. By doing so, Zhang Rong's wolf tropism is meant not to mirror, but to transform China and beyond. Zhang Rong is not the only contemporary Chinese writer who wishes to do so. Another literature doer is Zhang Chenzhi, a Hui Muslim writer famous for his embrace of Jahariya. That's an Arabic word I don't know how to pronounce. A Sufi order in northwestern China. In his Jahariya fiction, Zhang Chenzhi seems to express a rapport with Islamic fundamentalism to endorse a radical resistance against modernity. However, as Yi Binghuang contends, his real agenda is yelling for the maturation of a new national subjectivity. So the pack of grassland wolves is to Zhang Rong what the Jahariya is to Zhang Chenzhi. Both authors aiming far beyond the two groups themselves and taking the two groups as a new alternative for the self-regeneration or self-renewal of Chinese culture. So while Zhang Chenzhi is obsessed with Islamic idea of cleanness and titles his most controversial essay, Take the Penn as banner, Zhang Rong retains revolutionary, leftist idealism, hoping to change the country and its people with a wolf spirit. It's probably not a coincidence that both writers were Red Guards, 红卫兵, in the globally radical 1960s, and both are the dedicated apostles of Luncheon, the most revered modern writer in China. In 1907, here's a quote from Luncheon. When Luncheon was 26, he wrote, "Today, looking everywhere in China, where are the warriors in the field of spirit? We can make a truly sincere voice, leading us to goodness, beauty, strength, and health. Who can make a warm voice, leading us out of the wilderness? Our home is gone, and the nation is destroyed, yet we have no Jeremiah crying out his last elegy to the world and to posterity." For Zhang Rong and Zhang Chenzhi, the end of literature is to join the league of warriors and to do the things in the field of spirit. So, has Zhang Rong succeeded in transforming the national character of China? Luncheon bitterly failed. Zhang Chenzhi bitterly failed. The literary event created by Wolf Totem has at least brought about one change so far: the popularity of the wolf in the business world and the Chinese popular culture. Here's a picture of the bestseller theme with wolf, how to do business, how to manage a company with the wolf spirit. Huawei, a humble startup in 1987, and now the largest telecom company in the world, is famous for its wolf culture advocated by its founder, Ren Zhenfei. So here's a very lengthy paragraph, I quote from its official website. There's some, grammatical mistakes. I guess it's probably translated by, by machine translation. They claim very proudly the major organizational culture of Huawei company, which demonstrates the set of key values, beliefs, and attitudes shared by organizational members, is known as wolf culture. Wolf culture. You can compare this slogan with Google's, believe, don't be evil, don't do evil. The first character of wolves is bloodthirsty. That's grammatically wrong. Employees of Huawei are extremely sensitive to the market information and could respond promptly to any event. The second character of wolves is resistant to coldness, and the third character of wolves is taking actions in teams. I guess it's enough for you to know, to get the sense of this, enterprise culture. Another example is a blockbuster film named Wolf Warrior 2. As a sequel, this action film is about a Chinese soldier named Leng Feng, who finds himself in an African country protecting medical aid workers from local rebels and vicious arms dealers. Here's the record. It's the third film to pass 700 $100 million threshold in a single territory, following of Avatar and Star Wars, The Force Awakens. It is the first non-English speaking film that ranks among the box office top 100 of all time. When asked why the film was titled Wolf Warrior, the director Wu Jing said that just this guy, the Chinese version of Rambo, said it's because he loved these animals so much. He loved these animals so much and takes the wolf as an icon of China's military prowess when the country has become the second largest economy in the world. Wu Jing put one line here in Chinese. On the official poster, I give you a very lame translation. Though 1,000 miles away, the men who affront China will pay. Actually, the literal translation is will be killed. In another interview, Wu Jing noted that this wasn't my personal achievement. He's talking about the box office. It is because of explosion of patriotism among all Chinese people. Apart from this unapologetically zealous praise for patriotism and the friendship between China and Africa, Wolf Warrior 2 also pokes fun at the incompetent West. Here's a review from Salon.com. He writes, again and again, the film rams home the message that China is stepping up to help Africa where America is nowhere to be found. It's a message that will likely sit just fine with the isolationist-leaning policies of the Trump administration. So now, let's return to Wolf Totem. Genre fiction was meant to foster alternative modernity and national subjectivity in China, right? But the trajectory of this literary event is beyond the author's design. The so-called wolf spirit is very vulgarly appropriated by multinational corporations as a handbook in service of the slogan, business is war, and as a catalyst for producing more prodigious commercialism and consumerism. Elsewhere, the wolf is translated into a self-congratulatory icon in popular culture, paying homage to the new image of China as a riding world leader. In a nutshell, Zhang Rong, his avid readers in China have largely accepted the face value of wolfology. That's a coinage. Some desirable characteristics associated with the wolf, such as bravery, resilience, perseverance, spirit of teamwork, but they remained uninterested in the complex cosmology associated with the wolf as a totem. Has Wolf Totem made something happen? Yes. Could Wolf Totem change our national subjectivity in a way Zhang Rong desires? I highly doubt it. I plan to give an extended talk on Coetzee, Disgrace, but with the second thought, I opted out because my audience at Penn State must be familiar with this English-speaking author. Still, as a concluding remark, I'd like to venture a very preliminary comparison between Wolf Totem and Disgrace. If Zhang Rong writes about a young intellectual's coming of age in Inner Mongolia, when he was relocated from Beijing and encountered the grassland wolves, a kind of wild animals that totally renewed his system, his value system. Coetzee then presents us with an old, self-exiled intellectual who traveled from Cape Town to the rural land of post-apartheid South Africa and learned from the local dogs some similarly bitter lessons. Aging, misplaced passions, suffering, and the inconvenient truth about racial violence and black and white division. I like Zhang Rong, for whom, as Levi-Strauss put it, animals are good to think with, or as Donna Haraway put it, animals are some animated metaphors through which humans might frame arguments or sense broader possibilities. Coetzee takes his canine animals, beings in disgrace, not as a kind of carrier animal, but as a companion species. Excellent term coined by Donna Haraway. Donna Haraway here proposes a new mode of human-subhuman relational mode. She writes, dogs, in their historical complexity, matter here. Dogs are not an alibi for other things. Dogs are fleshly, material, semiotic presences in the body of technoscience. Dogs are not surrogates for theory. They are not here just to think with. They're here to live with. I found this paragraph highly illuminating when reading Disgrace. What Professor David Lurie, a character of far more psychological depth compared with Chen Zhen in Wolf Totem, he learned from the African dogs. What he learned from the African dogs is not an esoteric cosmology or some survival strategies or totem, etc. Rather, he found these animals equal to him, in that human or subhuman, they are all equally mortal lives, which face aging and death in the same way, in a similarly pathetic way. As companion species, men and the dogs, quote from Donna Haraway, construct rights in each other, such as a right to demand respect, attention, and response, end quote. Where Zhang Rong takes his works as a role model for national character, and on this ground calls for conservationism and environmentalism, Totem traces the century-old systematic racial violence in South Africa back to the barbaric modernity that invented animal slaughterhouses. Be it a grassland wolf or ridgeback, canine beings shouldn't be treated as superfluous bear life. Zhang Rong is against it because it doesn't match the Darwinian schema in nature. But for a humanist like Totem, it is simply because the value of animal life matters. Thank you.
We have plenty of time. Crystal, are you?
I'd like to hear more about how you, because as I can see you in your presentation, you try to sort of exonerate the so-called fascism of the text of Wolf Totem. But because you think that there is this idea of transforming Chineseness or Chinese national character. But I'm just wondering, because historically, if we talk about fascist discourse, there's a very strong sense of co-opted rebelliousness, but this kind of rebelliousness that is co-opted. And so this is the kind of discourses that actually thrives on this kind of discourse of national decline. If you actually go back to things like Nietzsche and stuff like that, they say, oh, Western civilization is declining because there's this liberal hypocrisy and this kind of civilized weakness. And so you really need that kind of barbaric savagery back in the civilizational spirit in order to thrive. And if you look at the discourses like Nazism, or even more recently in populism, if you see that the government is too weak, the people is too weak, the democracy itself is too weak. So we really need that savagery back in our politics and stuff like that in order to transform our national character. So I think the fascism, in fact, thrives on this kind of discourse about transforming the nation, of national culture and stuff like that. So I was just wondering how you come to justify your position with the text, because there's this idea that wolf spirit, Chinese being too weak and stuff like that. I'm really interested in that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. First of all, I have to say, fascism, together with new liberalism or political correctness, these are some sometimes are too frequently used to mean anything. It is frequently abused in a confrontation between the left and the right. And so it is my purpose of this presentation is not to exonerate Zhang Rong's Wolf Totem. On the contrary, I'm sort of I worry about the consequences of abusing the icon of Wolf Totem. If it is used in a prodigious way, in a very wrong way, it might be likely to develop into a kind of new fascism. I won't elaborate on this, but it's because it's a little bit sensitive. But as to the intention of the author himself, the authorial intention, I don't think he meant to be to write a fascist novel, given what he had been suffering from authority and from the resistance movement. So first of all, again, Kubin's charge is a little bit slippery. It's hard to say it's fascist or non-fascist, racist or non-racist. That's why I avert my discussion. I won't join the battle to label this text fascist or non-fascist. What I care about is the eventness of this book. Okay. Because sometimes I think the label fascism in discussion, in the public sphere, is quite slippery. It's sometimes misused.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about masculinity in these novels. So I know Disgrace, for bizarre reasons, particularly well. I don't know this novel at all. And what did strike me, just as I was thinking about it, having lived in a wolf environment in northern Canada, is that it's strange that the wolf is picked as this strong character, because wolverines are pretty bad in terms of aggression and as well. And that might just be, a statement. But what I'm really interested in is the construction of masculinity in these novels is also very different. And I was wondering if you could comment upon
that. As I said in the lecture, I take it as a coming-of-age novel in which the protagonist Chen Zhen acquired a kind of training or a class of masculinity by learning from the herdsman. Knows so much about the grassland wolves to be a, say, Mongolian man. That's a totally different model of masculinity, quite unfamiliar for the Han Chinese, because for us, the Han Chinese masculinity is probably modeled on the so-called 君子, a gentleman. You know how to fight, but your moral, concerning your moral training overweigh your aggressiveness.
Do you think that's true for the advertisement, though? For the advertisement for the company?
To the what?
The advertisement that you showed us for, come on, folks.
Huawei. Yeah, Huawei.
Because that's a very masculinist, aggressive kind of statement.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not seeing a lot of gentlemen in there, but maybe I'm...
Yeah. That's you're right. Huawei and the founder Ren Zhengfei, they are calling for a different type of masculinity, which I think is incongruent with the Confucian mode. But sometimes there's always it's tempting to talk about alternative masculinity in China because people might be fed up with the old genteel tradition, the 君子. So I think there's the interplay between two models of masculinity in this fiction. Yeah.
I'll be interested in hearing more about that, but I take what you're saying. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm intrigued by your effort to read Wolf Totem as world literature, a book that has a decidedly nationalistic agenda and that conducts a lot of navel gazing on problems of China and the Chinese. And let's be clear about it that the novel that Kubin is talking about and that the readers are reading about is not the novel that the Chinese readers have read, because Howard Goldblatt has thrown out, I think, a third of the whole novel, including many of these very nationalistic passages, including a very long afterword in which the author basically explains his own theory. None of this has reached English readers, who nonetheless feel that this feels fascist or feels too nationalistic. So here we have something that is very much bounded both spatially and discursively in China, Chineseness, things Chinese, but at the same time, as you point out, touches on questions of a much broader nature, where you come back in world literary space. Is it right? How I understand your link to world literature?
Yeah, you're right. Thanks for your commentary. I totally agree with you, and thanks for complimenting the information about this revision, because that is indeed an average version in the Goldblatt's translation, and for commercial reasons. Because the Chinese version is too chunky, as I said. So Goldblatt just chop off very lengthy paragraphs, some actually boring discourse on the so-called the wolfology, right? How to. That's actually not a novel at all. That's essay writing. Zhang Rong is doing essay in this part. So just to make this novel more entertaining, more intriguing for the Western readers, the publisher in the West decided to leave out that part. And I think there's another reason, as you point out, that Kubin is from a totally different cultural background. And literary meaning is always generated in a very specific context. If you are a German reader, you must be more sensitive to this arrangement of who's more powerful, who can rule over the other weaker races, because of the dark history of the Nazism in this country. But I think for the Chinese readers, who are the target readers for Zhang Rong, he's probably not that afraid of this kind of Marxist interpretation, because the Han Chinese, generally speaking, in recent history, were quite, I would say, not that aggressive, and we don't have that the conscience-stricken issue. I mean, as a concentration camp, genocide. So they probably didn't worry about that. So in our context, we can read in a very different way compared with Kubin's reading. So it's very tricky. And yeah, you're right. I try to read it as a event of world literature, and by doing so, I want to say there is a real, authentic, authoritative interpretation in the text. It takes the interaction and the travel and context of this text, of this novel, in different social and temporal spaces to create meanings. And this meaning-making process will lead to very unpredictable consequences in the future. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Could I follow up a little bit on the question of readership? You have been talking just now about the Han Chinese readership, we were also talking a moment ago about the Anglophone readership that is relying on this translation. Has there been a readership or an audience among the herding people in Mongolia who are being described? And do they have access to this? If so, what do they think about the representation of themselves and their society and the wolf totem and all of that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There are indeed some, readers from Inner Mongolia who are very critical of this book, because they would say Zhang Rong, the author, the Han Chinese author, oversimplifying the Mongolian religion, because that's a very complex system. It's not correct to simply say the Mongolian people worship wolf. That's a wrong theory. That's too simplistic. But the wolf, it's right to say the wolf was very, very culturally, significant for the Mongolian tribes. But it is not that simplistic. I mean, so in many reviews, the Mongolian readers just attacked this book by saying it's not what grass wolves in our place looked like. You misrepresent our history. You misrepresent our animals. You do this just to serve your own Han-centric purposes. So there is a lot of controversy. It's a very, very controversial book, as I said. And in turn, this just boosts the sale of this book.
So I actually don't care whether it is labeled as fascist or not, and because I think the labeling to a certain extent doesn't really help for us to actually effectively critique the fascism, right, that is there. So that question aside, I think I'm more interested in if there is a critical potential